أشهد أن أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن خفتم ألا تقسطوا في اليتامى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء مثنى وثلث ورباع فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة وأنكحوا أيام منكم صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. I bear witness that without Allah there is no God. I bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is the last, the final messenger of Allah, after whom no prophet old or new will come. And I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. There is a belief that is promoted by many Muslims, many Muslims, majority of Muslims, that Islam gives the right to a man to have more than one wife, to have a plurality of wives. Nothing can be further from the truth, because this is not what is stated in the Quran. In fact, when one looks at the verses of the Quran, you will see that the idea and the concept of polygamy is forbidden. So to say that there are different reasons why people put forward this. The first reason is to say that the Quran says that you can marry 2 or 3 or 4 women, as the case may be. We will look at that verse in a little while. It is the verse that I just recited to you. And the arguments they put forward is that, firstly, you can marry more than one wife if you can treat them equally, which is something that the Quran says you cannot do. The second reason they give is that you can marry more than one wife because that was the tradition of the Prophet after the Battle of Uhud, when many men had died and there were widows and orphans there. That itself is questionable with regards to the hadith that is referred to. It is sometimes either misunderstood or not clearly understood because of the way in which it has been presented. The Quran quite clearly points out to us. There are some also who say that, look, plurality of marriages is really forbidden. A person is supposed to marry just one wife, but Islam permits it to marry more than one. It's a permission, not a requirement. That argument also falls short, because you cannot have a permission unless you have something that is prohibited. It is when something is prohibited, you say, this is haram, this is forbidden. But then it is allowed in certain circumstances. The Quran gives us an example of this. When it speaks about forbidden foods, it says that you're not supposed to eat animals, meat of the animal that dies of itself, blood, the flesh of the swine, and whatever is mentioned there, that over which some of the name besides Allah is mentioned. But the Quran gives, those are haram, those that is forbidden. But the Quran gives us permission and says, but there are certain circumstances where that becomes halal, where you can eat the flesh of the swine, when you can even eat blood, when you can even eat an animal that dies of itself. And the Quran identifies this. It points out to us that this is an occasion in which you find that there are three conditions. One is that there is a necessity. For example, suppose there is a storm, there is an earthquake, tsunami, and there are survivors, everything is there, you cannot get groceries, the only animal available perhaps is either the swine, or even dead animals are there. The person is lost in the jungle and you're faced with certain situations. And then if the animal is dead and the blood is within it, you can't help it. So it says under necessity, and then it says you have no desire. It is not that something you want. It is not something you crave for. There is no desire in you. In fact, you may abhor it. You find it's very objectionable to go and eat that now. But if it's to save your life, it becomes lawful for you. And most important, you don't exceed the limit. You eat just what is necessary for your survival. You don't just gorge on it and just eat as much as you can because it's now become permissible. Just enough that is necessary. So that we find that these arguments don't really hold water, because if you look at after the Battle of Uhud, it is said that there were 70 persons who died in that battle. All of them perhaps were not married, some were perhaps young people, and many of them did not have, may have had one or two wives, as the case may be, but we don't see the Prophet Muhammad or any one of his companions marrying en masse, marrying so many people to solve this problem of widowhood. So how do we interpret and understand the teachings of the Quran? And is it a fact that polygamy or plurality of marriages is something that is given as a right to men? Just looking at the Quran alone, you will find that the Quran is quite clear on what this issue of marriage is and the relationship between male and female, husband and wife. It says, وَانْكِحُوا الْأَيَامَ مِنْكُمْ in chapter 24, verse 32. The basic principle it lays down. Take in marriage single persons from among you. Take in marriage single persons from among you. And the word used for single person is explained. It's a word that is well known to mean three things. A person who has never been married, whether male or female. A person who is perhaps divorced, male or female again. A person who is widowed, a widow or widow. In other words, these are single people. So you have a man and a woman cannot marry a person who is already married. A man cannot marry a woman who is already married. A woman cannot marry a man who is already married. That's what the Quran lays down. And one who is not married means either that person has been never married or they are widowed. So a man cannot marry a widow, and a woman cannot marry a widower. And a man cannot marry a divorcee, the divorced one. A woman cannot marry a divorced man. So this is a law laid down for each and every one. But there are special circumstances. There are circumstances in which a woman may find herself in certain situations where she is desperate and need of a husband. The Quran mentions what those circumstances are. Now, a man cannot find himself in such circumstances. If a man does not have a wife, he has an option of marrying so many women. He cannot marry a woman who already has a husband, who is living with a husband. That is forbidden. So he has the opportunity of looking, and he has older as well as younger women that he can take in marriage. But a woman may not be in such circumstances, and so the Quran tells us in the verse that is often quoted in chapter 4, verse 3, on the plurality of marriages, the Quran says, should you be worried that you're unable to secure the rights in special cases? in certain circumstances. There are certain circumstances in which women's rights, because the Quran stands for the rights of women, women's rights, you can, in special circumstances, then place in marriage. It is important to understand here, the Quran is not telling the individual reading the Quran. The words used here are in plural, and it can, if it applies to the Prophet Muhammad, how does it apply to the plural? It means he has to place in marriage, arrange marriages then. It doesn't mean you yourself have to marry, but marriages could be arranged. So place in marriage, whatever is appropriate or fitting to you of women. So look at the circumstances of the woman, look at the circumstances of the suitor, the husband, and if a person is not married, or is divorced, or is widowed, it's not a problem to get that married. But if the person is, if the husband is already married, is it permissible for him to take a second wife? The Quran says no. So what the Quran does here is that a man cannot marry a woman, but a woman can marry a man who is already married. In other words, polygamy is not the right of a man, it's the right of a woman. Since the Quran forbids men and women to marry people who are already married, women are permitted to marry persons if they are already married. And what are those circumstances? Now, before going on to that, it's important to note that what the Quran says here of 2 and 3 and 4 is often translated as 2 or 3 or 4. But the actual Arabic is 2 and 3 and 4. Because we may raise the question, if the maximum amount of women are allowed to marry a man who is already married, is it 4? Then the Prophet Muhammad married more than 4. How come when this verse was revealed, he married more than 4? It is simply because the interpretation that he took at the time was 2 and 3 and 4, which makes it 9. 2 and 3 is 5 and 4, 9. And the Prophet Muhammad never had more than 9 wives at a time. When he takes someone, either it would be somebody who is already had passed away. There were no divorces as far as I recall, but certainly he never had more than 9 wives at a time. But then the Quran came on and said, look, what you have done is only for you. That was a special case. But for the believers, that is not so. So since the believers are not to interpret this verse of the Quran in the way the Prophet Muhammad has interpreted it. That is what Allah says in the Quran. So then the interpretation comes where the word that means and is now interpreted to mean or. 2 or 3 or 4. And that's where the limit came about, and came about from the time of the Prophet Muhammad to now. But then the Quran points out to us, it says about these cases that are mentioned here, 2 and 3 or 4. Who are these women? Who are these that have the right to marry someone who is already married? And the Quran answers that question. It says, people request an opinion in the case of women. They want an opinion about this issue of women being allowed to marry a married man, if that is possible. The Quran says what is suitable. If they can marry a person who is not married, not a problem. But if they have to, there's no one and they can only marry one who is already married, they ask about that. So the Quran says, what is mentioned to you all in the book concerns special cases of women. It is not that a woman, a young girl, could just go and get married to a married man, as we see so common nowadays in many Muslim countries, and even here. People think this is a permission given to men so they can just marry anyone. No. The Quran says these are special cases of women. And what are these special cases of women? Whom you don't give what is prescribed for them. You're unable to give them their rights. There are certain circumstances and there are many reasons for that. And it says, or you have no desire to marry them, and with their helpless children, if they have children. So you would find circumstances in which a woman cannot get married to a single man. She may not find a husband who is single because she has many children. Some women have been disfigured for whatever reason. What we will call, some people are maybe ugly and people don't want to get married to them. Some may have been abused in some way or the other. In some cases, some people may have been raped and they are there. Does it mean that they have no option for a life ahead of them? So the Quran says there are some women who people have no desire to marry them because of age, because of abuse, because of whatever circumstances they may be. They are allowed to marry someone because you must stand up to secure the rights of these special cases. But whatever you do in the best of circumstances, Allah knows about it. So try your best to see how you can make this permission is given to women to marry a married man in certain circumstances. So the argument that people put forward that yes, you can marry 2 wives or 3 wives, you could treat them equally. That is an argument that falls short so far as the Quran is concerned. For the Quran says, وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ. You will never be able to bring about equality between women. So anybody who says I can marry a woman once, take a second wife or third wife or whatever, you could name yourself Abu Bakr or whoever you are, and you say I can do it because I can manage, I can treat them all equally. The Quran says that is impossible. The words used here, the Arabic word for negative in the future is lan. There are 2 words used in Arabic for negative. One is lam, which means negative in the past. Never, it has never been done. And the other one is negative in the future, lan. You will never be able to do this. So how could people put forth the argument that they are allowed to marry 3 or 4 wives, as the case may be, because of the Quran? It's a total misunderstanding of the Quran that came out through the ages. It has been there for centuries, and no one has dared touched it to try to interpret it differently because never bothered. It just became part of a cultural pattern. But we have to understand the Quran is a book of guidance. And we have to look at it carefully and see how best it can bring about in the society the rights of people so that they can have their moral and spiritual development. And this is why it is so important to interpret these verses of the Quran. One doesn't have to go into a long list of hadiths to say how many wives the Prophet married, and we note that in the case of the Prophet, if people say they are following Sunnah, well, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad is that he did not take a second wife while his first wife was alive. And secondly, he did not get married, plurality of marriages, he did not enter into that until he was about 50 years of age. So for young people or others, Muslims who say that this is just a carte blanche, it's an open invitation for men to take more than 1 wife, regardless of the circumstances, under the feeling that yes, I can treat them equally. All this is total hogwash and fallacy and incorrect interpretation and teaching of the Quran. So we, as members of the Ahmadiyya movement, we stand firm by understanding the Quran and not allowing culture and tradition and others to merely influence us in the way in which we interpret the Quran. So that we stand for the rights of women, and we point out that the Quran says that neither a man nor a woman can marry someone who is married, but in special circumstances, the woman is given that right to marry a man who is already married, and if those circumstances can give her some rights, look after her children, look after her rights, she's not doing it because of desire. It is because of necessity, not of desire, and not exceeding the limit. That's why the Quran puts a limit on it. So but men are not even inclined to do that, to go and take a second or third wife. And that's why the command is given to men. Men are told, yes, if this is a right of woman, and you have to do it, or you are required to do it, or you are called upon to do it, you can do it. Look at it, and it says, mataba, like the Quran says, mataba lakum min nisa. Look at the circumstances and see what is fair, what is equitable, what is best in the circumstances for you, for your family, for your wife. Because remember, when a woman enters into a relationship with a man, marital relationship, there are a lot of issues to be decided. There's the issue of inheritance, the rights of the children, the rights of, if the man dies, does the first wife get the property, or is it shared? Should a woman who just comes as a second wife take all of the property or part of the property and deprive the wife of what she really, the rightful wife of what it is? These are cases that have happened and are happening. The Quran also gives guidance with regards to that, but that's the subject of another sermon that deals with common law relationships and so on, and who have what rights and so on. The Quran deals with that. So that's important for us to uphold this principle that the Quran does not permit, or if we say it permits polygamy, the Quran actually forbids polygamy. And polygamy is not the right of a man, it is the right of a woman, but a man is given the instructions that if you have to do this, you are following a decision which is given by Allah. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa nafa'ana wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun kareem malikun barrun rahim. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم اخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعل منهم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله أكبر.